Hi everyone. My name is In Kyung Kim, and I am an assistant professor at the economics department of Nazarbayev University. So today I'm going to talk about the country image and consumer choice evidence from the COVID-19 pandemic. So COVID-19 has caused an ongoing global health crisis. So the number of confirmed cases reached 150 million worldwide, with more than 3.2 million deaths. And the COVID-19 outbreak also caused several structural changes throughout the economy, affecting labor markets, farm productivity, and income inequality. And the politicization of the origin of COVID-19 and vaccine for the disease has been growing and evolved into global tension among countries. For instance, the former US President Donald Trump blamed China for the pandemic and announced to withdraw the US from World Health Organization. So in this paper, I study the impact of country image on consumer choice by exploring the exogenous negative shock to the image of China in the era of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I focus on the beer market in South Korea, where Qingdao, a Chinese beer brand, is particularly popular among consumers. And through a series of empirical analysis, I found that consumer utility from Qingdao decreased substantially after the COVID-19 outbreak. And the impact not only varied across regions, but also depended on the cumulative number of confirmed COVID-19 cases. And consumers who quit drinking Qingdao switched to other non-Chinese beers rather than consuming or choosing the outside alternatives. And the results of the empirical analysis also revealed that the raw sales of Qingdao were more than 5 million liters during the first 8 months after the COVID-19 outbreak. And the impact was not weakened even in October 2020, which is the last month of the sample. But in contrast, sales of a non-Chinese beer brand increased by 1 to 1.6% during the pandemic period. So there are several implications of the empirical findings of the paper. So first, forms from an animosity evoking a foreign country may need to take proper countermeasures, such as establishing a joint venture with local firms and adopting local brands. And second, competing firms may be able to make the best of the opportunity by advertising their brands more aggressively. And finally, politicians and policymakers may need to seek international cooperation to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic before it further exacerbates global tension among countries and disturbs international trade. This paper contributes to the literature on country image and product evaluation by using observed sales and price information to estimate the impact of country image on consumers' real product choices, not just their purchase intentions. And unlike previous boycott studies, this paper considers a case where boycotts of products from the target country have never been called for. And this provides an ideal environment to identify the pure impact of country image on consumer choice, free from boycott-related incentives to eschew products from the target country, such as enjoying the thrill of victory or avoiding social censure. And this paper is also connected to the literature on the economic implications of the COVID-19 pandemic, in the sense that it exploits the exogenous negative shock to the image of China in the COVID-19 pandemic era. In the summer of 2020, PEW Research Center, which is an American think tank, conducted survey on views of China in several developed countries. And the survey results show that the negative views of China soared in 2020. So for instance, 75% of respondents in South Korea replied that they see China unfavorably, mainly because they poorly assess China's response to the outbreak of COVID-19. So given the survey results, I consider the outbreak of COVID-19 an exogenous negative shock to the global image of China. And the left panel of the figure shows that the number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 surged in February and March as the novel coronavirus began to spread widely through local transmission. And this first wave of COVID-19 was especially devastating Daegu, which is the fourth largest metropolitan city in South Korea. And then the second and third waves hit hard the Seoul metropolitan area. And in 2019, South Korea was the 18th largest beer market in the world. And two local breweries like Obi and Haidt, they control more than 70% of the market. And consumers buy beers mostly at convenience stores and independent stores. And the right panel of the figure shows that except for February 2020, beer consumption was higher. The monthly beer consumption was higher in 2020 than the previous year. And also there is a strong seasonality in beer demand, which peaks in the summer. And this table lists the 25 top-selling beer brands in South Korea between 2019 and 2020. So Qingdao was the second most popular imported beer brand, right after Heineken. And it was actually the fifth most popular among all beer brands, including domestic ones. And South Koreans will recognize that Qingdao is a Chinese brand. And this is because the brand has been on the market for longer than 20 years. And also because Qingdao obviously sounds, Qingdao obviously is Chinese sounding. And in addition, the brand is marked in Chinese on the packages of the beer. So the presence of this well-recognized popular Chinese brand is advantageous to obtain a transparent measurement transparent measure of the impact of country image. And for the empirical analysis in the paper, I use data on South Korean beer market obtained from Nielsen IQ, which cover the 25 best-selling beer brands sold in each of the 16 regions of South Korea between September 2019 and October 2020. So it includes both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic periods. And the data provide monthly sales volume and price per liter for each brand and region. And the sample consists of 5,600 brand, region, time level observations. And for the demand estimation, I define a market as a region at a given time. And the market share of a brand is the ratio of its sales volume to the market size. And this table summarizes the data separately for Qingdao and the 24 non-Chinese beer brands. So the average sales volume of the Chinese beer is 10% higher. 10% lower during the post-pandemic period compared to the pre-pandemic period. But in contrast, the post-pandemic sales of a non-Chinese beer brand is 13% higher on average than its pre-pandemic sales volume. And this is reasonable given that overall the beer consumption is higher in 2020 than after the outbreak of the pandemic than the pre-pandemic period. And in addition, consumers might have switched from Qingdao to these non-Chinese beer brands after the outbreak of the pandemic. So because of the time limit, let me skip the preliminary diff and diff analysis and start directly with the demand estimation approach. So there are two empirical issues. First, consumer choices might be affected by price changes as well as the outbreak of COVID-19. And second, as opposed to Qingdao, non-Chinese beers were likely to benefit from the deteriorated image of China. So I address these issues by taking a structural approach. So first, I estimate random coefficient Lodging model. And then using the estimated consumer utility parameters, I simulate the practice sales of each beer during the pandemic period at the COVID-19 outbreak not occurred. And then I compare these practice sales with the observed sales to quantify the impact of the country image. So I define consumer I's utility from beer brand J in market M and the utility from the outside option in this way, where Y and P represent consumers' income and the beer price respectively. And I assume the consumer's marginal utility of income, like alpha I, depends on the income itself and the consumer's unobserved additional characteristics VI. And in the model, capital R is the indicator for each of the 16 regions in South Korea. And Qingdao and COVID, they are another indicators for Qingdao brand and post-pandemic period, that is at and after February 2020, respectively. So in this specification, beta R measures the impact of country image the impact of country image on consumer utility from Qingdao in region R. And I decompose the brand characteristic side into these 4 terms, and where the first 3 terms can be captured by brand, region, and time-specific dummy dummy variables. And the last term, delta xi, contains the remaining components of the brand characteristic. And I assume that the idiosyncratic K-sharp epsilon is IID time 1 extreme value distributed. And the income and the unobserved consumer characteristics and the unobserved idiosyncratic K-sharp are independent. Then the predicted market share of brand J in market M, or SJM, can be calculated in this way, where delta JM is the mean utility from product J or brand J at market M, which is common across all consumers in the market. Then by matching the observed market shares, and the shares predicted by the model, we can invert out the delta xi, or the market-specific valuation of the brand, and construct this moment condition. Okay, and then the identification of the model requires a set of endogenous, exogenous instrumental variables for the price, because price is obviously endogenous. So I exploit the panel structure of the sample by using the average prices in other markets before, on, and after the current time t as the instrumental variables. So this identification strategy is valid as long as the market-specific valuations of the brand delta xi are independent across regions. So the first 2 columns report estimation results of a simpler model where the marginal utility of income is constant, or alpha I is equal to alpha. And the last 2 columns report the estimation results of the full random coefficient model. So clearly consumer utility from Qingdao decreased significantly in all regions after the outbreak of COVID-19. And the price coefficient is negative and statistically significant, and consumers with higher income, they are less price sensitive as expected. So it is plausible that the impact of country image may change over time depending on the COVID-19 situation. And I test this argument by using the cumulative number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 in each market. And the estimates in the first 2 columns show that the higher the number of confirmed COVID-19 cases, the lower consumer utility from Qingdao. And when I add the interaction term between the nationwide COVID-19 count and the Qingdao dummy, then the estimation results reveal that consumer choices are affected more by the nationwide COVID-19 count than the regional count. So this finding is reasonable given that South Korea is a small country, and people consumers in South Korea are interested in affairs all over the country. And then using the estimated consumer utility parameters, I simulate the market share of brand J in market M with the COVID-19 indicator turned off. Then I compute the practice sales by multiplying the practice market share by the market size, and also the gap between observed and practice sales volumes and the sales revenues. So, the two panels plot the sales gap and the revenue gap of Qingdao in Gangnam, which is the south of Seoul region. So the gap is close to zero before the outbreak of COVID-19, but the observed sales deviates sharply from the practice sales after the COVID-19 outbreak. And this table reports the observed and practiced post-pandemic sales of Qingdao in each of the 16 regions, as well as their gap. As well as the gap between the observed and practiced sales. So the lost sales of Qingdao exceeded 5 million liters in total during the 8 months pandemic period, or equivalently sales decreased by 21%. And also the effect of country image varies across regions, ranging from 11% to 30% sales decrease. And I also compare the observed and practiced post-pandemic sales of the 24 non-Chinese beer brands. And as expected, they benefited from the deteriorated image of China during the pandemic period. So their sales increased by 5.5 million liters in total, which is close to the lost sales of Qingdao. So this implies that consumers who quit drinking Qingdao have switched to these non-Chinese beer brands rather than choosing the outside alternatives. And finally, the estimated revenue loss of Qingdao is almost 25 billion Korean won in total, whereas the total estimated revenue, the total extra revenue of the 24 non-Chinese beer brands is around 22 billion won. Hence absorbing most revenue loss of Qingdao. So in this paper, I studied the impact of country image on consumer choice in the context of South Korean beer market. And I exploit the exogenous negative shock to the image of China in the era of the COVID-19 pandemic. And I address the price changes by firms and product substitution by consumers by adopting the discrete choice demand framework with random parameters. And through a series of empirical analysis, I found a large impact of country image during the first 8 months after the COVID-19 outbreak. So consumer utility from Qingdao substantially dropped during this period. And the lost sales of Qingdao exceeded 5 million liters. But in contrast, 5.5 million more liters of non-Chinese beers were sold than the prediction. So that's the conclusion. Thank you very much for listening. to my presentation. Thank you.